That day, I was only planning on making a simple call. Just wanted to ask my son what time his wedding was, so I'd have time to press my old suit, comb my hair right, and put on the watch my Lucy gave me years ago. But before they could even answer on the other end, my daughter-in-law Diana got on the line. Her voice was sweet but cold as a razor. "Oh, we got married yesterday, Art. We only invited the important people." I froze, still holding the old rotary phone in my hand. That phrase, important people, just echoed in my head, heavy as the wooden mallet I use in the shop. 35 years raising him, paying every tuition bill, hanging every door with my own sweat. And it turns out, today, I wasn't important enough to see him get married. That afternoon, the sun came through the workshop window, lighting up the particles of sawdust floating in the air. I was still holding the wedding invitation they never sent me. The only thing I'd made for my son's happy day was an oak picture frame, one I'd carved their names into with a small whittling knife. Now, looking at it, it just seemed ridiculous. In the wedding photos they posted online, I saw Diana's parents, her family, wine, white flowers, and my son, Michael, smiling, happy, next to his bride in a dress I'd helped pay for. All my life, I've been used to the silence. When my wife was alive, I was a man of few words. I just worked and listened to the rain on the tin roof. After she died, I stayed the same. I just added an old radio so it wouldn't feel so empty. But that afternoon, the silence stopped being my friend. It turned into a wound. I looked down at my hands, the calluses stacked up like history itself. Hands that held him when he was born, that shielded him from the rain, that offered my back when he fell. Now, these same hands were shaking, not sure where to rest. I made myself some black coffee, the only thing that still tasted real in this house. The smell of the coffee filled the workshop, mixing with the scent of pine resin and the sweat of the wood. Everything I have, I've made with these two hands. Never borrowed from anyone, never owed anything to anyone. Except for one thing, the trust I put in my only son. I sat in a chair next to the portrait of my wife. She looked at me with her same eyes, kind and sad. I told her, real quiet, "You see, Lucy? He went and got married without needing his old man. I thought I'd run out of tears the day I said goodbye to you, but I managed to find a few more. These tears weren't salty, just tasteless, like the sound of the rain hitting that old tin roof." When night fell, I turned off the lights, leaving just one yellow bulb burning in the middle of the shop. My shadow stretched out on the cement floor, lonely but upright. I realized that maybe this was the last project of my life. Not a table or a cabinet, but learning to stand on my own 2 feet one more time, even if I was broken inside. Tomorrow, I won't ask any more questions. I won't call, I won't look for excuses to see him. Love, when it turns into a debt, only leaves the taste of rotten wood. And I, Art Miller, the old carpenter of this town, have just discovered that my son, the person I loved most, has hammered the first nail into my own coffin. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments below. I was born in West Virginia, in a house with brick walls and a tin roof that groaned every time it rained. My father taught me the carpenter's trade when I was 12. "Son," he'd say, "wood is like people. If you know how to wait, it behaves. If you get impatient, it'll split on you." I didn't learn much from books, but I learned that lesson well. All my life, I've only had two things to believe in: my hands and my word. When I got married, I built this little house with my own hands, nailed every board, set every brick. My wife, Lucy, used to put flowers on the porch and say the house smelled like real people, not paint. Then, Michael was born. I clearly remember the first night he cried until he was hoarse, while Lucy slept, exhausted. I took him out onto the back porch. The sky was full of stars and the hum of the cicadas was constant. In that moment, I thought, I must have done something right in my life. Many years later, when Lucy died from lung disease, I almost gave up. But seeing that skinny 10-year-old boy hugging his mother's picture while he shook, I knew I couldn't fall apart. I promised her at her grave, "I'll raise him to be a good man in your place." And I kept my word. In the last 35 years, I've never failed anyone, especially not someone who's already gone. Every morning I was up at 5, made coffee, opened the shop. The warm smell of wood was like taking a breath. When Michael went to college, I took night shifts at a buddy shop. Calloused hands, a stooped back, but I never complained. I just felt joy seeing him get his diploma. I bought a new shirt that day, and he kissed me on the cheek, saying, "Dad, I'm going to make you proud." And I believed him. I believed him with everything I had. But time passed, and that pride turned into silence. He came home less, our talks got shorter, and every time he passed through the shop, his gaze seemed to go right through me. I thought it was just work, so I didn't pay it much mind. What father doesn't want his son to spread his wings? I kept sending him money when he needed it, personally fixed the leaks in his roof during the rainy season, changed his light bulbs every time he fought with his wife. I told myself, a man can't let his son see him weak. Now that I think about it, maybe it was that silence that killed me, slowly. I was living out of duty, not joy. I forgot that a son doesn't need a perfect father. He needs a father who knows when to say no when he's being hurt. The night after the wedding I wasn't invited to, I sat in the shop again, listening to the tick-tock of the clock, steady as the breath of the past. I missed Lucy. If she were alive, she'd surely say, "Art, you're bottling it all up again." And she was right, I was. I was bottling up the shame, the emptiness of this house, and the title of good father that now felt heavier than ever. I lit a cigarette, a rare thing for me, and watched the smoke curl around the lamp. In the smoke, I saw the shape of the little boy who used to run through the shop, grabbing scraps of wood to use as toy cars. I smiled, a bitter smile. Maybe I built a lot of things stronger than steel, but I failed to hold on to one person's heart. I don't know how long I sat in the shop that night. I just remember the wall clock striking 12, a cold, regular sound like someone else's heart. The next morning, when I turned on the radio, the first news that popped up on my phone's small screen was a photo. Michael and Diana in their white outfits beaming in front of St. Michael's Church. Under the photo, a sentence, "A perfect day with the most important people in my life." I looked at it over and over. Diana's parents, their friends, they were all there. Even the priest and an orchestra. The only one missing was me. I thought it was a joke, until I saw Lucy's silver necklace, the one I gave Diana so my daughter-in-law would have something to remember her mother-in-law by. It was shining on her neck as she smiled and kissed Michael. I turned up the volume on the radio. An old country song was trying to drown out the ache in my chest. But the more I listened, the emptier I felt. The picture frame I'd carved their names into, sitting on the table, now looked like a tombstone for a father-son relationship. I wasn't angry. I just felt a tiredness that went all the way to my bones, maybe because I was already too used to being forgotten. That afternoon, I opened the closet and took out the gray suit I'd planned to wear. It still had the tag from the dry cleaner, smelled like mothballs and wood dust. I tried it on. I looked in the mirror. The size was still right. It was only the face in the mirror that was strange. The man I saw wasn't a loser, but someone who had lost his reason to fight. I remembered the times Diana would call, asking for a little favor, Art, and I'd take out money without asking questions. The times Michael promised to pay me back and forgot, and I pretended to forget too. I had given so much, there was nothing left for them to value. Love, if you don't set boundaries, just becomes an accomplice to ingratitude. That night, I made coffee, the only habit that still calmed me. As the steam rose, I heard the rain on the porch. It was hitting the tin roof, the exact sound Lucy loved most. I closed my eyes and imagined she was sitting across from me, smiling kindly. Art, do you still remember the day Michael was born? You said you'd never let anyone hurt him. I nodded softly, even though it was just to the wind. Yeah, I remember. I just never imagined he'd be the one to hurt me the most. I didn't sleep that night. I went out on the porch. I sat by the window, watching the flickering lights of the town in the distance. Down on the street, people walked by, holding hands. Me, all I had were my calloused hands, shaking slightly from the cold and the loneliness. I remembered something my father used to say. Son, the most valuable wood is the kind that takes a nail without splitting. I pressed my lips together. Maybe it was time to see if I was still that kind of wood. Before I went inside, I looked at the wedding photo one last time. Then I turned off the phone and put it in a drawer. Tomorrow, I told myself, there's no more coffee for anyone but me. I turned off the light. In the darkness, Diana's words still echoed. We only invited the important people, and I knew that from that moment on, I would have to learn to live as if I were important, at least to myself. A week after the important people-only wedding, the phone in my house rang on a gray morning. I was cleaning my workbench in the shop when I heard a familiar voice. Art? It's me, Diana. I stayed silent for a moment, honestly not knowing how to talk to the daughter-in-law who'd stripped me of my title on her wedding day. Her voice sounded different. It wasn't cold and haughty like usual, but shaky, with a forced sweetness. Art, we have a little problem. This month's rent, you haven't transferred it yet. You must have forgotten. The landlord said if we don't pay this week, he's sending someone to change the locks. I sat down in the chair, feeling both strange and amused. It was the same voice that had once sweetly begged me to contribute to the wedding dress, the rings, the photographer's deposit. And now, the same voice, just swapping the word wedding for debt. I looked around the shop. Everything was just as quiet as always. The smell of varnish, of pine resin, the pale light coming through the window. I ran my hand over the table to wipe away the sawdust, and then I said slowly, Diana, do you remember when you said you only invited the important people? There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. Yes, Art, I didn't mean it like that. Well, then I didn't mean to forget. I only helped the important people. I hung up the receiver before I could hear a, Art, don't be angry. The sound of the plastic hitting the phone's base was as crisp as wood splitting. It wasn't my intention to hurt anyone. It was simply time to stop. A moment later, the phone started ringing off the hook. 3, 4, 5 calls. The name Michael lit up on the screen, but I let it ring until it went to voicemail. There was a time I would have run from the shop to the bank under the hot midday sun just because he said, Dad, it's urgent. Not anymore. My only urgency today was keeping my own heart peaceful. I sat down and poured my second cup of coffee for the day. The first one is always bitter. The second is smoother, like a person's heart when it starts to heal. I remembered my father. He used to say, when someone calls you because they need money, don't be in a hurry to feel sorry for them. Listen to how they call you, with gratitude or just out of habit. It took me 30 years to understand that sentence. I looked around the shop, the only place I really had any value. Every plank of oak, pine, walnut, they were all silent. But I understood them. Wood is only beautiful when the carpenter knows to stop the knife at just the right moment. If you cut too deep, the grain cracks. In the afternoon, I went out on the porch and watched the sky darken. The wind brought the smell of rain and tree sap. It had been a long time since I felt this peaceful, a peace that I didn't need anyone to grant me. I turned on the radio and let the sound of an old guitar mix with the distant thunder. Tomorrow I'll go to the bank and cancel all the automatic transfers. Nobody has to know. No arguments, no justifications, just a signature, and I'll give myself back the right to live. That night, before turning off the light, I whispered to Lucy in the photo, Honey, I just learned how to say no. And when the darkness filled the room, I felt more illuminated inside than ever before. 2 days later, I pulled all my savings out of the bank and transferred them to a new account, in my name only. Nobody knew, not even Michael. I wasn't angry anymore. I just needed peace. That morning, after signing the papers, the bank teller asked me quietly, Do you want to close the old account as well? I nodded, and with the hum of the printer in the background, I felt as if a door was closing. I walked out of the branch. The May sun in Chicago was hitting hard, but the air was still cold. I went to my usual diner and ordered the usual, black coffee, no sugar. The place hadn't changed, but I didn't feel like a part of it anymore. Next to me, 2 young guys were talking about their houses, their old-fashioned parents, and how, in this life, you have to live for yourself. I smiled slightly, took a sip of coffee, and felt the usual bitterness. But this time, it seemed as light as the wind. I went back home and pulled out an old suitcase. I didn't pack much. A couple of changes of clothes, Lucy's old camera, a photo of the 3 of us when Michael was little, and the notebook where I'd been writing down my expenses. I called a taxi and asked the driver to take me to the main bus station. "Going far?" he asked. "Not too far," I answered. "Just need a change of scenery." The bus took me to a small coastal town in Michigan where I'd worked when I was young. The waves still crashed, the wind was still salty, but my heart didn't feel so heavy anymore. I rented a small room in a guest house near the harbor. It was narrow, with whitewashed walls and a window that looked out at the lake. The first night there, the murmur of the waves replaced the noise of the city. The smell of salt crept into my dreams. I hadn't slept that deeply in a long time. In the morning, I went down to the beach and saw some old-timers fishing. One looked at me and nodded. "New around here, friend?" "Yeah, just left Chicago." "More and more people leaving there. Round here, few people care who you are. Long as you catch something, it's enough." I laughed. Maybe it was true. Here I wasn't Mr. Miller, the failed father. Just a man with a fishing rod sitting in silence, listening to the water. The next few days, I dedicated myself to writing everything down, not to complain, but to remember. Every night I opened a new notebook and wrote, line by line, as if I were telling the story to myself. Today the water is blue. I learned to be quiet without feeling sad. One afternoon, I called Michael, the first time in many days. He answered, his voice choked up. "Dad, are you okay? I'm sorry about the other day. Diana." She got a little worked up, but I didn't mean, "Don't apologize, I have to thank you too." "Thank me? Thanks to you two, I learned to live for myself." "Don't say that, Dad." "No, I'm serious. From now on, you live your life. I'll live mine." I hung up before he could answer. No anger, no pain, just a feeling of calm. That night, I walked out to the shore. The wind was blowing hard, and the waves were breaking with white foam. I opened the old picture frame and looked at the faces of the two people I once thought were everything. Lucy smiling and a little Michael hugging her leg. I said quietly, "It's all okay now, Lucy. I've learned to let go without holding a grudge." The lake didn't answer. It just sent a small wave that wet my feet, cold, but alive. I understood that this was the real beginning of the life of a father who learned to love himself. The next morning, the sky was overcast, and the wind carried a smell of rusted iron from the anchored boats. I'd just gotten back from the fish market when the phone started ringing off the hook. 7 missed calls, all from Michael's number. I didn't answer. I'd gotten used to the piece and didn't want to give explanations anymore. But on the 8th call, I picked up, not out of nostalgia, but out of curiosity to see what else he could possibly say. "Dad, I need to see you. It's urgent." "What's wrong?" "I'm on my way to the house." I sighed. There was no, "Can I come?" or "Do you have time?" He was still the son who thought everything in his father's life could be pushed aside for him. About 30 minutes later, a car pulled up. I'd barely put my notebook in a drawer when I heard footsteps on the porch. It wasn't just Michael. I recognized a woman's voice, Diana, and another man's voice, unfamiliar, firm, with a professional tone. I went to open the door. Michael came in first, wearing an impeccable suit and an anxious look he was trying to hide with kindness. Diana was behind him, carrying a large purse and a smile as fake as someone visiting an old friend. The third person was a middle-aged man with a dark tie and a black leather briefcase. I immediately recognized his type, lawyers, or worse, hired thugs to scare old folks. "Dad, we just wanted to talk for a minute," Michael started. "You don't need an appointment to come into this house, but you'd better get to the point." He looked around, as if he were inspecting a property. Diana sat on the sofa without being invited and took out her phone to start recording. The unknown man pulled out a stack of papers. "Mr. Miller, I'm the Morales family attorney. Your son is a little worried about your mental health and wants to make sure everything's in order before something happens. This is a power of attorney." I laughed softly. My laugh left all three of them bewildered. A power of attorney? For who? "For your son, of course," Diana chimed in. "Dad, we just want to help, to be able to pay the bills, take care of the house. Don't make this harder on us." I walked over and looked the lawyer straight in the eye. "Do you know how many contracts I've read in my life? How many blueprints? How many papers for buying lumber, for selling workshops? I can smell a lie right through the ink." The man swallowed and looked away. Michael tried to smile. Dad, don't misunderstand. I'm just worried about you. At your age, you shouldn't. At my age, I still have the strength to build you a coffin with my own hands if you dare to keep talking like that, I interrupted. The atmosphere froze. Diana stood up, trying to soften her voice. Art, we just want to secure everyone's future. You can't live alone forever. True, but unlike you, I know how to earn a living. I opened the door. Now, get out of my house. Michael's face changed and he raised his voice. You're losing control. We just want to help. Help? I managed to smile. Is that what you call going through someone else's house papers? That's when I noticed it. On my desk, a drawer was slightly open. Several envelopes with documents were out of place. I walked over. I pulled it open. It was empty. Lucy's old will. The deed to the house, the savings passbook, everything was gone. I turned, and my eyes met Diana's large purse. Give me the bag. Art, don't overreact. I snatched it from her hard, and the papers fell out, scattering across the floor. My papers? Nobody said anything for a few seconds, just the sound of the waves coming from the open door, like a long sigh from the lake. I looked at my son. My voice was low, but colder than the wind. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Michael stammered. Dad, Shut up. Get out of here before I forget I'm your father. Diana pulled on her husband's arm, half scared, half angry. They left the house without closing the door. I watched them walk away until the car disappeared down the sandy road. I closed the door. My hands were shaking, but my heart was strangely calm. I knew this wasn't the last time they'd come to talk. Next time, they'd come to steal for real. I looked around the little house by the lake, took a deep breath, and said to myself, it's okay. You picked this battlefield. I'm not running anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the waves breaking on the shore was like the slow hammering in my heart. With every whistle of the wind through the cracks in the door, I heard Diana's voice. Art, you just have to sign. But the silence that remained after they left was colder than the lake water in winter. I spent the whole night sitting at my wooden table, the steam from my coffee mixing with the smell of pine resin, thinking about the 30 years I lived just to be that son's pillar, and how those were also the 30 years I forgot who I was. When the first light crept through the window, I had made a decision. I changed the lock, secured the iron gate, and stuck a small note on the door. No strangers welcome, not even ones named Miller. I turned on the radio, an old country song, and threw the windows wide open. The smell of the lake flooded the house, salty and real, like the feeling of being alive. Around noon, I heard a car. I didn't need to look. I knew it was Michael. He pounded on the door so hard, the mirror on the wall shook. Dad, open up! You can't do this! I stayed in the shop, drinking my coffee, not answering. You're making things complicated for us. I just want to protect your assets. His voice suddenly cracked, a mix of anger and panic. I opened the window and looked out at the yard. He was there, fists clenched, while Diana waited in the car, her face as cold as iron. I said, loud enough for them both to hear, There's nothing to protect. I can protect myself. Dad, I don't want this to get bigger, Michael said through gritted teeth. If you keep being this stubborn, we'll have to get a judge involved. I smiled, a soft but firm smile. You can ask for help from anyone you want. But before you do, remember, the only person who has the right to decide about my life is me. He was silent for a few seconds, and then he shouted, You're going to die alone. I answered him, my voice as steady as a hammer's strike. A chosen loneliness is more dignified than affection bought with money. Diana rolled down the car window and yelled, You'll regret this, Art. I laughed, a dry laugh that caught in my throat. Thanks, but I've done enough regretting. Now it's time to live. Michael looked at me one last time, with the look of someone realizing that the power they thought was eternal, the fear, the debt, the title of father and son, no longer had any effect. He turned around, got in the car, and the door slammed shut with a dull thud, like the end of a chapter. I stood in the middle of the yard, watching the car drive away, the wind from the lake making the old flag on the porch wave. On the steps, the papers they had dropped were still there, copies of contracts, certificates, all kinds of fake signatures. I bent down, picked them up one by one, and tossed them into the wood stove. The fire caught quickly. The paper curled, turned to ash, and dissolved into the wind. I sat in a chair and took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, no one could touch my life but me. I remembered Lucy, I said quietly, as if talking to her. Honey, I finally learned the lesson you taught me. That sometimes forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about stopping others from defining you. When it got dark, I hung the little sign on the door again. This house belongs to Art Miller, a man who chose freedom. Then I turned off the lights, letting the moonlight illuminate the wooden floor, white and peaceful. I understood this battle was just beginning, but this time, I was no longer fighting to hold on to his son. I was fighting to get myself back. The next morning, the day broke clear and quiet. The lake was so blue I could see the seaweed swaying gently under the water, but in my head the waves hadn't calmed down yet. I knew perfectly well that Michael and Diana wouldn't stop just because I refused to sign a paper. People like them, used to getting everything with pressure and tears, wouldn't accept losing it all. And I, for the first time in my life, decided I wouldn't let anyone take anything else from me. Not a cent, not a night of peace. I changed my clothes, combed my hair, and left the house. The town was small, but it had everything. A grocery store, a post office, a cafe, and even an old law office on the main drag. The paint on the sign was faded. Charles Harris, attorney at law. That name stopped me in my tracks. Charles Harris. I'd heard that name years ago. He was the one who helped Lucy and me draft our first will. An honest, meticulous man, and above all, someone who knew how to listen. When I walked in, he was still sitting in the same place I remembered. Gray hair, thick glasses, a coffee mug, and an old fountain pen in his hand. He looked up and squinted. Art Miller? My goodness, how many years has it been? I thought you'd moved to Chicago for good. I did, but now I'm back, looking for a little justice. He smiled and motioned for me to sit. I told him everything. From the wedding I wasn't invited to, the call asking for money, to the day my son burst into my house with a strange lawyer. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds and then nodded slowly. I understand. That's elder financial abuse, Art. I've seen many cases like it, but unlike most, you've been clear-headed enough to realize it in time. Clear-headed, yes, but I'm old. Where am I going to get the strength to fight? The strength doesn't matter. The paperwork does. Do you still have Lucy's original will? I shook my head. They took it. Don't worry, I have a copy in the old files. Lucy was a woman who planned ahead. Hearing that, I felt a lump in my throat. It was as if she was still helping me, despite being gone so many years. Charles stood up. He pulled an old file from a safe, blew the dust off it, and opened it. Here it is, the original will. I'll file a request to reestablish your property rights. We can also request a protective order for your assets while we wait for the resolution. I looked at him, half skeptical, half hopeful. Will it work, Charles? I don't want to fight anymore. I just want to be left alone. That's exactly why you have to fight. Peace never comes if you don't take back control of your life. He had me sign some legal papers. My hand was shaking, but I forced myself to sign clearly. When I finished, he said quietly, From now on, if they dare to come back, tell them to contact me. Don't let anyone in. Don't open the door. You're not alone anymore, Art. I left the office. The wind from the lake was blowing harder, as if it carried a smell of freedom mixed with the scent of wood from the boats being repaired. I went to a cafe near the boardwalk. I ordered a strong black coffee and sat watching the water. In the reflection of the cup, I saw my face, old, weathered by the sun, but with a spark I hadn't seen in years, determination. Before going home, I stopped by the hardware store and arranged to have all the locks changed. Then, I bought a small security camera and installed it right at the entrance. When the technician asked me how many days I needed it to record, I replied, Long enough to have proof if anyone dares to come back. That afternoon, as the sun was setting, I turned on the radio and listened to an old Patsy Cline song playing softly. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, raised it, and said quietly, For Lucy, for the lost years, and for the man she believed was good. I drank it in one go, letting the whiskey burn my throat. and then I smiled. From this day on, Art Miller was no longer the old fool. I had an ally, and for the first time in many years, I felt like I was starting a new life, the life of someone who is no longer afraid to lose. I woke up early. The sky was clear and the lake was as calm as a mirror, reflecting every bird that flew by. I was on the porch, a cup of black coffee in my hand, listening to the smell of wood from the shop mix with the salty breeze. Today I wasn't planning on doing anything grand, just cleaning. But in my mind, I had a list of things to erase, the last traces of dependency. First, I called the bank. The operator's voice was young and polite. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. How can I help you?" "I want to close all my old accounts and cancel any power of attorney that was linked to my son's name, Michael Miller." The girl paused, her voice still professional but a little lower. "Are you sure, sir?" "More sure than I've ever been." I heard the clacking of the keyboard and then the sound of a printer. She said, "All set, sir. All dependent accounts and powers have been removed." I smiled slightly and said to myself, "It's over, Art." Afterward, I called Charles to give him the news. He laughed out loud on the other end of the line. "Excellent. You are now officially financially free. I'll complete the legal paperwork today." "Oh, and I've also sent a warning letter to your son. From now on, any act against your assets will be considered a criminal offense." I was quiet for a moment, then replied, "Thanks, Charles. You just helped me win my first battle without having to fight." At noon, I went to the market to buy a few things, a new lock, a lamp for the porch, and a small bouquet of flowers. On the way home, I ran into Mrs. Renata, a widow who lived 2 houses down. She was pushing her bicycle with a basket of fish. "Mr. Miller, I haven't seen you in the town square in a long time." "I've been busy putting the house in order," I smiled. She looked at me. Her eyes seemed to read something more. "You look different, lighter." "Yes, I just got a big weight off my shoulders." "Usually people get rid of material weights, but you've gotten a weight off your heart, haven't you?" she said, half joking, half serious. I smiled but didn't answer. "Mrs. Renata invited me for coffee in the afternoon, down by the water." I nodded. After so many years, it was the first time I'd accepted an invitation that had nothing to do with family or responsibilities. When I got home, the phone rang. It was Diana. I watched the screen light up and just let it ring. 3, 4, 5 times. On the 6th, I answered. "What are you doing, Art?" Her voice was shrill, with a hint of fear. "Why is the bank saying we don't have access anymore? Are you really going to abandon your own son?" Calmly, I replied, "No, I've only abandoned those who saw me as a talking wallet. You can't treat us like this. Michael is devastated. The company. His company has nothing to do with me. I supported him for 35 years, Diana. Now he has to learn to stand on his own. You're going to regret this. Maybe so, but at least I'll regret it in freedom." I hung up and turned off the phone. The house was silent again. I could only hear the ticking of the clock, as regular as my own heartbeat. At sunset, I took the small bouquet of flowers to the beach and stuck it in the sand. It wasn't to remember anyone, but to mark a milestone. I looked out at the horizon. The wind ruffled my gray hair. I thought about Lucy, about the years that had passed, about the times I had endured humiliation to give my son a future. Now I understood. A future built on someone else's submission is just an illusion. On my way back, I saw Mrs. Renata waiting for me at the cafe. We sat on the patio, a steaming cup of coffee between us. She asked, "And what do you plan to do now?" I looked out at the lake. The evening light turned the water's surface to gold. "I don't know yet, but for the first time, I have the right to choose." She nodded and smiled, and I realized that breaking ties isn't just an action, it's a ritual, a baptism for a soul that's been tied down for too long. That night, I slept deeply, without dreams. I only heard in my half-slumber a voice whispering, "Well done, Art. Now, you're really living." In the following days, my life fell into a new rhythm. In the morning, I'd open the windows to let the breeze in with the smell of fresh coffee. At noon, I'd walk to the little square near the harbor, and in the afternoon, I'd go back to the shop to make small pieces to sell to tourists. There was no more phone, no more papers, no more falsely polite voices calling me dad, only when they needed money. I lived slowly, like someone who has just come out of a storm and is relearning how to breathe. One morning, while I was sanding a picture frame, I heard a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Renata. She brought a basket with warm muffins and some cheese wrapped in wax paper. "Do you work so early you don't have time for breakfast?" she said, leaving the basket on the table. I smiled. I'm used to it. If I eat late, I feel empty all day. Well, sometimes empty is good. It gives you space to fill it with other things. I invited her to sit. We drank coffee and talked about simple things, the flowers at the entrance, the weather, the kids running down the street. But in the silences, there was something strange. It wasn't a heavy silence, but warm, like an old blanket. Renata told me her husband had passed away 8 years ago. Her 2 children lived in Germany and called a couple of times a year, out of obligation. At first, I waited for their calls every day, she said, her gaze distant, then every week, and then every month. Now, when they forget, I feel less tired. I nodded. There are pains that, when you let them go, don't make you smaller, they just make you lighter. She pointed to the half-finished picture frame. Whose photo is that for? I smiled kindly. Nobody's. I'm making it for pleasure to hang in the house. An empty photo? Yeah, I think sometimes frames need a rest too. They spend their whole lives holding on to others. They rarely get the chance to be empty for themselves. Mrs. Renata laughed, a hoarse but soft laugh. You talk like a poet. Not at all. I'm just a carpenter who thinks too much. We fell silent, listening to the sound of the waves against the rocks. After a moment, she looked at me, her eyes a little misty. Art. I've heard your story. From some neighbors, about your son, the house. I just wanted to tell you, you're not alone. There are many people like you, and like me, treated like a burden by our children, and having to learn to love ourselves again from scratch. I looked down at the table and saw my hands were shaking slightly. I don't blame him anymore, I said. Holding a grudge makes you live just like the person you hate. I just want to forget. You don't need to forget. Just don't let it define the rest of your life. In the afternoon, she invited me to the cafe by the water. It was a small place, made of white painted wood, with yellow lights and pots of cacti on the windowsills. I sat across from her, with a steaming latte. She took an old photo from her pocket. It was a young couple at their wedding, holding hands, their eyes bright. See? Back then I also believed love was forever. But now I understand that eternal is when you still remember to treat yourself well. I was silent. Mrs. Renata didn't know that sentence had touched the deepest part of me, the place where I still kept the image of Lucy, the kind woman who fought by my side all her life, but who didn't have time to teach me how to live alone. When the sun began to set, I walked her to her door. Before she left, she turned and said, I'm making fish soup tomorrow. Why don't you come over? I make too much and eating alone is a waste. I nodded, smiling. I'll bring the wine. She laughed. Her voice sounded like gentle waves. All right then, until tomorrow. And Art. Don't be afraid to be happy again. You hear me? I watched her walk away down the small street, and suddenly, Lucy's voice echoed in my head, soft and distant. I knew you'd find someone to talk to, once your sadness was ripe enough to not need tears. That night, I sat by the window. The moonlight fell on the wooden table, casting a glow on the empty frame hanging on the wall. For the first time, it looked beautiful to me, because it finally had space for the future. The next morning, while I was getting a few things ready to take to Renata's, the old rotary phone rang. The screen lit up with the name Donna Miller, my younger sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in almost 3 years. I hesitated. That name brought back a whirlwind of memories, childhood laughter, the days we ran barefoot through Dad's workshop, and also the endless arguments after Lucy died. Finally, I answered. Art? Is that really you? Her voice was still as soft as ever, but it was shaking. It's me, Dana. Who else could be this old? She laughed, and then there was a long silence. Maybe we were both waiting for the other to break the ice. I could hear the wind on her end of the line, mixed with music from a distant radio. I heard about everything, she said. Michael came to find me last week. I froze, my heart sinking. What did he tell you? That you weren't well. that some neighbor was manipulating you to get your property. He even asked me to help him convince you to sign the papers. I smiled bitterly, not surprised. And you believed him? Dana was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was hoarse. At first I did. I thought someone was really giving you bad advice until he started talking about the house. What house? Your house in Chicago. He said he needed to sell it urgently to pay off company debts and that you had already agreed. I closed my eyes. It was all clear. Everything he had done, the call, the lawyer, the surprise visit, revolved around that property. I never agreed to anything, I replied. I know. And I know something else too. They were talking about money, not you. Michael didn't mention anything about your health or your happiness. He only asked about prices, interest, transfer taxes. I bit my lip, staying calm. Thanks for being honest. Art, forgive me for believing them, but there's something else you need to know. Dana's voice got deeper, as if she was afraid someone was listening. My brother-in-law works at a bank. He checked Michael's history. He owes almost $100,000. He has mortgages and short-term loans, and Diana took out all her savings to invest in her husband's company. They're both desperate. I was silent, feeling a mix of sadness and bitter laughter. So their caring for their old father was nothing more than a plan to save themselves from debt. I think so. I told him straight. I told him if he bothered you again, I'd call the police. If you do that, they'll hate you. Let them. Family doesn't mean you have to bow your head to what's wrong. I smiled, a smile that mixed pride and regret. Donna was always stronger than I thought. She continued, I just wanted you to know you're not alone. If you need a witness, someone to testify at a trial, I'll be there. Thanks, Dana, but I think I'm okay. I've got Mr. Harris, a good neighbor who makes me fish soup, and the lake breeze. What else could I need? She was quiet for a few seconds, then laughed through tears. It's been a long time since I heard you sound so light. We exchanged a few more words and hung up. I sat by the window, watching the sun shine on the roof of the house across the street. On the table, Renata had left a basket of oranges yesterday. The smell of the peel filled the shop, fresh and vibrant, like the scent of a new beginning. I took my notebook, opened it to the first page, and wrote in small letters, Dana. The one who reminded me that blood isn't for dividing, but for holding you up. That afternoon, I took the basket of oranges to Renata's house. She was hanging laundry and waved. I just talked to my sister, I told her. I feel calmer now. She nodded. That's good. Blood isn't always clean, but sometimes it's the only thing that saves you from drowning. I looked out at the lake, where the waves shined like silver. A feeling of relief spread through me. I knew the storm was still somewhere on the horizon, but this time I wasn't afraid. Because someone else knew the truth, because I was no longer alone in the war called family. 3 days after the call with Dana, I started to see the first signs of the storm returning. In the afternoon, while I was adjusting a hinge in the shop, I heard a car stop in front of the gate, a sharp break in the slam of a door. I went outside. It was the same black sedan, and Michael got out, his impeccable look gone. He wore a wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, and a face twisted with anger. Behind him came Diana, phone in hand, recording everything. Dad, Michael shouted, so loud the sparrows on the roof took off. Do you think you can humiliate me like this and just get away with it? You canceled all the accounts. You cut off my cash flow. I lost the project. I wiped my hands on a rag, calmly. You lost it because of your ambition, not because of me. Don't play the moralist, Diana intervened, pointing the phone at me. I'm recording this so we have proof when we report you for hiding family assets. I looked directly at the camera and said calmly, This is my house, and what I do is legal. You two no longer have any rights here. Michael got closer, his face red, his voice tense. Dad, I'm not leaving until you sign the power of attorney again. I stayed silent. I opened the door to the house and went inside. He tried to follow me, but just then, a car siren sounded. A police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out, and between them was Charles Harris, my lawyer, wearing a blue shirt and carrying a folder. Hello, Miller, he said to me, and then addressed Michael in a cold voice. You are requested to leave this area immediately. According to a provisional court order from the city, valid for 30 days, Mr. Michael Miller and his wife Diana are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mr. Artmiller. Diana turned pale. What? Charles opened the folder and showed the order with the red stamp. It's a temporary protective order for a senior citizen. There are sufficient grounds: trespassing, threats, and theft of personal documents. You have no right, Michael shouted, clenching his fists. I don't, but the police do. An officer stepped forward, firm but not aggressive. Please get in your car. If you resist, we'll have to write you up. Michael looked at me, his eyes bloodshot like a wounded animal. Dad, you'd do this to your own son? I replied slowly, every word etched on the wind. It's not me who did this to you. It's you who did this to your father first. He froze, then turned around. Diana was still tapping on her phone, cursing under her breath as she walked away. When their car was gone, the yard was quiet again, just the steady sound of the waves breaking on the shore. Charles let out a long sigh and took off his glasses. I suppose I don't need to tell you that you did the right thing, Art. I smiled, a weak but sincere smile. I just want peace, Charles. I don't want my son to go to jail. I just want him to stop. I understand. But sometimes, for others to stop, you have to be the one to step forward first. He put a hand on my shoulder and left with the two officers. I stood in the middle of the yard. The wind blew through the fence, and the flag on the porch waved like the silent drum of a victory. That afternoon, I sorted through the house, the torn papers, the things Lucy had used, even the yellowed family photo. I put it all in a wooden box and took it to the backyard. I didn't burn it. I just buried it. Because there are memories that, even if painful, deserve a dignified burial. When I threw the last shovel of dirt, the wind brought the damp smell of distant rain. I looked at my hands, still calloused, still strong. You've taught me one last lesson, Michael, I said quietly, that sometimes, to keep affection, you have to know how to set boundaries. In the sky, the dark clouds began to clear, and the last light of day filtered through like a thin golden thread. I understood that the storm had passed, but the sea would still be rough. And I, Art Miller, was ready for the next part of the battle, one where I would no longer just defend myself, but stand up to reclaim my own dignity. The next morning, while I was having my coffee, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't Michael's aggressive pounding, but a soft, regular, polite knock. I opened it. A woman in her 50s stood there, dressed in a light gray pantsuit with an official-looking ID. Next to her, a younger person, probably her assistant, held a thick folder. Good morning, Mr. Art Miller, she said, her voice soft but firm. I'm Elena Cruz, a social worker with the Department of Social Services. We've come to verify your situation, following a complaint from a family member. I smiled slightly. Let me guess. The complaint is from Michael Miller, my son, right? Yes, she replied with a hint of discomfort. According to the complaint, you are suffering from severe psychological deterioration. You are being manipulated by third parties and could be at financial risk. I invited them in. I poured them coffee. And then I said, slowly, if you've really come to worry about a senior citizen, I thank you. But if you've come to carry out my son's plan, please read this file first. I opened a drawer and took out the folder Charles had prepared. Inside was the copy of the court order, the trespassing report, and the recordings from the front door camera. The assistant took the folder and handed it to Ms. Cruz. They looked at each other and read in silence. After a few minutes, she looked up. Her expression was very different from when she arrived. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. It seems the situation is not as it was described in the complaint. I nodded. No, it's not. In fact, the one who needs psychological supervision is my son, who thinks he can replace affection with greed. She sighed softly and closed the folder. Could you tell us a little more about what happened? I told them everything, without resentment, with honesty. The wedding, the papers, my daughter-in-law's words about important people, and how they brought a lawyer to my house. While I spoke, the assistant sat motionless, not writing. Ms. Cruz said slowly, Mr. Miller, I've been in this field for over 20 years, and I've rarely seen someone maintain their calm as you have. Most people who suffer financial abuse from their children stay silent or fall apart. You've done the right thing. I laughed, The right thing? I just wanted peace, but if peace means turning a deaf ear to injustice, I prefer the noise. Ms. Cruz nodded and took out a new form. I'm going to file a report to verify everything again, and we will send a recommendation to the court to maintain the protective order. Furthermore, we can help you enroll in the Independent Seniors Program. You'll have full legal protection and a social advisor who will visit you periodically. I shook my head, smiling kindly. Thank you, ma'am. But I have a good lawyer and a good neighbor. I just need the state to do justice and not allow people like me to be considered a burden. The assistant asked quietly, Do you live alone? Not exactly, I said, looking across the street where Renata's house was hidden behind the olive trees. I have a friend. At this age, a sincere friend is worth more than 100 courtesy visits. They left after almost an hour. Before leaving, Ms. Cruz turned and said, Mr. Miller, it's possible your son will try to countersue, but if you need it, Mr. Harris and I will collaborate to protect you, and if possible, I'd like to invite you to a talk on the rights of senior citizens. Your experience could help a lot of people. I smiled slightly, the sunlight reflecting in my tired eyes. You want me to give a talk? I'm just a carpenter. A carpenter with dignity is worth more than 10 graduates without a conscience, she replied, and left. When the door closed, the house was silent again. I looked around. Everything was the same. The wooden table, the coffee pot, the empty frame on the wall. I sat down and sighed softly. In the afternoon, Renata stopped by with some lavender flowers. She smelled the coffee and asked, Did you have visitors again? Yes, I replied, this time from the government. Did they bother you? No, they came to confirm I'm not crazy. She laughed, her eyes bright. I already knew that, Art. Someone who stays calm in the middle of a storm can't be crazy. I smiled and put the lavender in a vase. Outside, the wind brought the smell of the lake and the distant sound of church bells. I thought that maybe life was still fair. It just sometimes arrived late. And for those who were once considered useless, justice is the most subtle but the most persistent perfume of life. 3 days passed in a calm so strange that I began to think that, maybe after the restraining order, Michael and Diana would stay put. But life isn't that simple. On Wednesday morning, while I was making coffee, someone knocked on the door. It wasn't a violent or hurried knock, just 3 brief, polite taps, so courteous it put me on alert. I opened the door. A man stood there, gray suit, black leather briefcase, a look as cold as steel. He introduced himself as a psychologist, commissioned by social services to evaluate my condition. I smiled slightly. The same trick again? I don't know what you mean. I'm just doing my job. Here's my credential. I glanced at the paper. Real name. Authentic seal. But the ink looked suspiciously fresh. I feigned naivety. I invited him in and served him a glass of water. He started with mechanical questions. Do you remember what day it is today? Sure, it's Wednesday. Don't know the date, but I know the price of coffee just went up 20 cents. He took notes without looking up. Have you had any visitors recently? Yes. A woman I trust and 2 fakes pretending to be worried. I think you belong to the second group. He stopped and raised his head. A flash of surprise crossed his eyes, followed by an icy coldness. You know, old age can cloud perception. Sometimes one doesn't realize they're being manipulated. Yes, I agree. For example, when someone is hired to pose as a doctor and sign a false report, that person is also being manipulated. He jumped up, his face contorted. Calmly, I took out my phone and pressed a small button on the screen. The hidden camera in the corner of the kitchen turned on and started recording. The coffee hasn't cooled yet, doctor, I said quietly. Want to wait for my lawyer to get here to drink it together? Just hearing the word lawyer made him nervous. He stammered a couple of excuses and hurried out the door. I didn't stop him. I just watched him go and then called Charles Harris. 2 hours later, Charles was at my house. I showed him the recording. He watched it and frowned. This document is authentic, but it looks like a reprint. He's a real person, but he works freelance. It's very likely they hired him. Who? Charles shrugged. You already know. You don't need to ask. He called a contact at the social services office and sent them the video as evidence. Art? From now on, if anyone knocks on your door without an appointment or an official summons, don't open it. I'll ask the police to verify. They're trying to set a trap for you again, but this time it's going to backfire on them. In the afternoon, the police stopped by my house. I gave them the video, they filed a report, and took note of every detail. A lieutenant looked at me with a mixture of admiration and pity. "Mr. Miller, a normal senior would have a hard time getting out of a scam like this, and you turned the trap into evidence." I just smiled. "I'm a carpenter, young man. I've spent my whole life examining the grain of the wood to know where it's rotten. It's the same with people." That night, I sat alone on the porch with a small glass of whiskey. Renata brought me some toast and asked why there was a police car in my yard. I told her. She shook her head, her look a mixture of compassion and indignation. "Human greed, Art. It's like termites. Once it gets into the wood, if you don't eliminate it at the root, sooner or later, everything collapses." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not afraid of it collapsing anymore. I'm just afraid of staying quiet." She smiled and poured me more whiskey. "Then let's toast to the courage to know when to say enough." We toasted. The liquor swayed under the moonlight. I told her stories from before, how I had taught Michael to cut wood, to distinguish the cross grain from the long grain. I told her that if you cut in the wrong direction, the wood splits, just like a person's heart when it's forced against its nature. Renata put her hand on mine, warm and firm. "Maybe you can't cut the father-son relationship, but you've stopped the rot, and that's enough." That night, the wind from the lake blew hard. In the distance, the church bells sounded like a warning for those conspiring in the dark. I looked in that direction and said quietly, "Go ahead, Michael. The more traps you set for me, the more you'll help me prove I was never weak." Then I closed the door and locked it. Inside, there was no more fear, just a strange peace. The peace of someone who has stopped running and is preparing to enter the final phase of the battle, where justice must name the true culprit. After the incident with the fake doctor, my little coastal town suddenly felt smaller. People looked at me with a mix of curiosity, respect, and pity, but it didn't bother me. Peace was a luxury I had reclaimed with my own honor, and I would defend it to the end. One morning, while I was cutting a small piece of wood in the shop, Charles Harris called. His voice was serious, but with an edge of urgency. "Art, I just got news. Your son has filed a lawsuit in the civil court in Chicago, requesting that you be declared incapacitated." I fell silent, watching the wood dust float in the light. Then I asked, slowly, "He's trying to declare his own father crazy?" "That's right, and he's hired a pretty big law firm. But don't worry, I'm already prepared. We won't let that happen." I took a deep breath. The time had come. The final battle, not in my house, but in a courtroom. Charles came over that afternoon. He spread all the documents on the table. The video evidence of the break-in, the recording of the phone call, the video of the fake doctor, the temporary protective order. Everything was perfectly organized, as meticulous as wood planks measured to the millimeter. "Art, we need a real doctor to confirm that you are completely lucid. I've contacted Dr. Morales, a clinical psychologist with national certification." I laughed. "Morales? Same last name as my old one. I hope they don't accuse him of favoritism." "I chose him precisely for that reason," Charles replied. "He has an impeccable reputation, and no one will dare to question his results." The day of the exam, I went to the medical center with the attitude of someone going to rediscover himself. Dr. Morales was a calm man, of few words, but with a very bright gaze. He didn't ask me stupid questions like, "Do you remember what day it is?" Instead, he asked, "Do you consider your life worth defending?" I answered without thinking, "Yes, because it's the only thing I've built without owing anything to anyone." He smiled slightly, nodded, and continued with a series of deeper questions. The exam lasted over 2 hours. When it was over, he shook my hand. "Mr. Miller, if anyone says you've lost your faculties, that person should get themselves checked. I'll send the report to Mr. Harris." That night, I had dinner with Renata. She made a fish soup with white wine, the aroma filling the patio. When I told her about the lawsuit, she put her hand on my shoulder. "You know, Art, a person only truly gets old when they let others speak for them, and you've never been like that." I looked at her and saw a strange warmth in her eyes, the kind only those who have been through pain and still choose tenderness have. The next day, Charles returned with a thick folder. I've filed the countersuit. We also have witnesses, Renata, Donna, your neighbor Ramiro, and even the bank where you canceled the power of attorney. They all confirm that you are completely lucid and autonomous. I nodded, feeling a current of warmth run down my back, not of anger, but of renewed confidence. In the afternoon, I went to the beach and watched the sunset stain the surface of the water red. The wind brought the smell of salt, evoking memories of Lucy. I spoke to her in silence. See, honey, I finally dared to defend myself. When the sun had completely set, I returned to the shop. The yellow light illuminated the old wooden table where I began to carve something special. A small plaque with hand-engraved letters, each stroke firm and deep. Dignity cannot be signed over by power of attorney. I placed it at the entrance of the shop, like an oath. From now on, no matter how much noise there was in the courthouse, I would remain calm inside. Because I understood that justice isn't just about winning, but about standing tall, without bowing your head, even with the wind against you. And for the first time in many years, I went to sleep not feeling like anyone's father or anyone's victim. I was just Art Miller, the man preparing to go to trial, not to prove he was right, but to remind the world that some old men still have their memory. And that memory is the living proof of the truth. The day of the trial, Chicago woke up to a dense fog. I put on the old suit Lucy had picked out for our 20th wedding anniversary. It was faded, but spotless. Charles Harris walked beside me, a thick folder in his hand. He said quietly, his tone serious but encouraging, "Art, today you're not just defending your assets, you're defending all the elderly people who were disrespected." The courtroom wasn't large, but it was full. On the other side, Michael and Diana sat with 3 lawyers. They avoided my gaze, just whispered among themselves. I looked at my son, not with anger, just seeing a man who had lost his soul trying to keep his money. The judge, a middle-aged woman with an intelligent, firm gaze, entered. The gavel sounded. We now begin the hearing for civil case number 45225. The plaintiff, Michael Miller, requests that his father be declared incapacitated and that the administration of his assets be transferred. The defendant, Art Miller, opposes and presents a counterclaim for fraud and financial abuse. Michael's lawyer began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. The defendant, Art Miller, shows signs of incapacity to manage his assets. He is being manipulated by third parties. I listened, smiling slightly. When they presented their evidence, Charles stood up, his voice low but firm. Your Honor, we request to present some evidence to the contrary. An audio recording, a video of the illegal entry, the stolen documents, and an official psychological evaluation report from Dr. Morales. He handed over the documents. The judge reviewed them and then looked up at Michael. Mr. Miller, are you aware that hiring someone to impersonate a medical professional is a crime? Michael went rigid and stammered. I just wanted to help my father. Help? The judge interrupted. I've read in your loan application that the date coincides with the day Mr. Art Miller revoked your power of attorney. Did you need the assets to pay your debts? The courtroom fell silent. Diana lowered her head. Charles looked at me and nodded slightly. It was my turn to speak. I stood up, my hands shaking, but my voice calm. Your Honor, I didn't come here to win against my son. I came here to preserve the little that a man who has worked all his life manages to get, self-respect. I haven't lost my mind. I've only lost my trust. And today, I want to get it back. If you ask me if I hate my son, I'll say no. I just regret that he forgot what I taught him. Wealth is created, not snatched away with paperwork. The judge looked at me for a long time and then nodded slightly. When the witnesses were called, Donna, Renata, even Mr. Ramiro, each one told simple, honest things about how I lived, worked, and helped others. There were no tears, just respect in every word. Finally, the judge read the verdict. After examining all the evidence and testimony, this court declares that Mr. Art Miller possesses full civil capacity. Furthermore, all claims by the plaintiff are dismissed. Additionally, this file will be referred to the district attorney's office to investigate the possible crimes of forgery and financial abuse committed by Mr. Michael Miller. The gavel sounded. I didn't shout. I didn't celebrate. I just closed my eyes gently. A slight breeze came through the window, bringing with it the smell of dust, old iron, and freedom. Out in the hallway, Charles shook my hand. "You just taught the whole system a lesson about dignity." I smiled and replied slowly, "I just proved that even though some things get old, dignity doesn't." But if he... In the distance, I saw Michael looking at me, his eyes red. We looked at each other for a few seconds. There were no words that could repair what was broken. But at least, between us, the war was over. 3 months later, everything was calm. I sold the house in Chicago and donated half the money to the Seniors in Control Foundation, started by Ms. Elena Cruz. I used the other half to buy the little house by the lake where I was living. Not to hide, but to start over. On moving day, I had lunch with Charles and Renata on the porch. She brought baked fish, and he brought white wine. We laughed and talked as the wind brought the smell of the lake through our conversation. "What do you plan to do now, Art?" Charles asked. I smiled. "Open a woodworking class for the kids in town. For the ones who don't have a father, I'll teach them to make tables, to know the wood. So they know that hands that know how to create beauty will never be disrespected." Renata laughed, a warm look in her eyes. "You've been the same all your life, always wanting to rebuild something." "True," I said, "because wood only dies when it's abandoned. People too." In the afternoon, after they left, I walked out to the shore. The sky was stained gold. I took Lucy's pocket watch out of my pocket, the only thing I kept. The hands were still working, with their steady tick-tock. I spoke to her quietly, as if she were there. "See, honey? I made it in the end. I'm not angry anymore, not afraid. I just miss you. But it's a calm kind of missing." The wind blew, and the waves came up the sand, wetting my feet with a pleasant chill. I picked up a small piece of driftwood and carved into it with my knife. Freedom isn't going far away, it's living without asking anyone's permission. I stuck the piece of wood in the sand, letting the waves circle it. The sun set, an intense orange spreading over the water. I turned and walked slowly back to my little house, where the yellow light from Renata's house had just turned on across the street. Inside me, only one thing remained. Peace. Not the peace of someone who gives up, but the peace of someone who has walked through the storm, soaked, but is still standing. That night, I sat on the porch, a small glass of whiskey in my hand, listening to the sound of the lake, as regular as a heartbeat. For the first time, after half a life of enduring, I no longer felt like a betrayed father, but simply like a man who had learned to forgive. His son, life, and himself. And so, Art Miller, the old carpenter of this town, finally completed the greatest work of his life. A free man. If this story captivated you, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left of the screen. Thanks for watching.